Welcome, everyone, to our monthly seminar on spirituality and health. I'm Dr. Harold Koenig, and we are delighted today to have Dr. Teresa Ushok speak to us today about C.G. Jung and the religious instinct. Dr. Ushok is a medical instructor in the Duke University Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. She earned her BS and MD at Northwestern University and completed the Duke Psychiatric Residency, and then graduated as an academic associate in psychoanalysis from the Psychoanalytic Institute of the Carolinas. After 30 years of service at the Durham VA, she retired and currently has a psychotherapy private practice in Chapel Hill. She serves as the president of the C.G. Jung Society of the Triangle area of North Carolina. She also nationally has presented papers at the American Psychiatric Association panels on literature and psychiatry, an IPS Spirituality and Psychiatry Caucus workshop, an ASCSI on the science of joy, and other topics. Her essay, Embracing the Shadow, was e-published on southwritinglarge.com. So Teresa has been a colleague of mine for well over 30 years, and I'm very excited to introduce her to you all. So Teresa, why don't you unmute yourself and take off here.
Thank you, Harold, for this opportunity to speak about Carl Jung and the religious instinct. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychoanalyst and psychiatrist. He lived from 1875 to 1961, and he believed in the soul. He proposed a religious instinct and studied the numinous experiences that grouped people with a sense of the divine. The religious instinct had a sense of inherently there's an impulse for reflection, to search for meaning, and to connect with the transcendent. And he found that throughout history and around the world, there was this impulse and a universal language of symbols that would emerge from the collective or transpersonal unconscious. Now, people often wonder where to start reading Jung because there is so much. Princeton Bollingen Press has 20 volumes of his academic work, and also letters and lectures that he's given. And now the Philemon Foundation is trying to complete the works and translating letters he had, such as the Jung White letters with a Dominican priest and theologian, other seminars he's given, and lectures. And in the future, they're working on getting the actual transcripts of the tapes he gave to his secretary for his autobiography, because she sort of antified it. She made his autobiography probably more tame than he was. The exciting news was in 2009 when the Red Book was translated and released. And although we had heard about his confrontation of the unconscious in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, his autobiography, this was a chance to see what he actually did with it. And we'll be looking at some of his, we can put together the dreams he described in his autobiography with the paintings in the Red Book. And I'll share 5 dreams of his today. For the general public, a good place to start is actually his autobiography, which is called Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And for a very extreme introvert, he found that his inner life was much more significant to him than his outer life. And so it's an unusual type of autobiography. It includes 42 of his own dreams in it. And this, he spoke with his secretary, and she put it together, and it was published after he died. But in 1959, he gave a famous BBC interview where he was asked, "Do you believe in God?" And he said, he looked confused and said, "I don't believe, I know." And this created quite a stir, because what he meant by "I know" is that he had experiences. He didn't mean that we can know the ineffable, mysterious mystery, but he had experience that had so gripped him. It was true to him. After that interview, they wanted him to publish another book just for the general public, and he was refusing to do it, and refusing and refusing. And then he had a dream where he was actually giving a lecture in a marketplace, and all the people there were listening with rapt attention and understood what he was saying. And so then he decided, yes, I'll write it. I want to have other analysts write it. So he wrote one chapter on symbols for Man and His Symbols, which was published 10 days before he died. So these are two books that are good to start with. Today, we're going to look at his life story and the influences for his spiritual development and the development of his approach to spirituality. So we start with him being born in Switzerland. These are his parents, Emily and Paul. And 2 years before he was born, they had lost a son in infancy. His father was a Swiss Reformed pastor, so he was a preacher kid. He was brought up in the church. His grandfather was a professor of medicine, and his mother's father taught Hebrew at Basel University. But his mother was very depressed, living in Kessel, Switzerland, a small town, until they moved back. So the childhood struggles for him were that his mother was hospitalized for over a month when he was 3 years old. He was mostly an only child until he was 9. His sister Trudy was born. And so he spent a lot of time alone. There is one mention of his sexual assault when in a letter that he wrote to Freud. A mention also of being pushed or bullied by another boy at school and developing fainting spells after that. But the most significant thing was his father. Jung has said that nothing has a stronger influence psychologically, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. And Jung's father, pastor, taught his confirmation class, and Carl surprisingly found himself bored and felt his first communion was hollow. It seemed his father went through things dutifully and was a good person, but he seemed to have an unhealed wound, as Jung would say, that he didn't have an experience of the vitality or a living faith. And my proposal is that he spent his life developing that experience with the living relationship, with a living vital relationship with the divine, as he would discover it to be, because of his father's, what they would call it, burnout or lifelessness around his faith. So his father died in 1986, and Carl was a sophomore at school, living at home. This ushered in a period of poverty. Other family, extended family, had to help pay for him and his mother to keep them afloat. He would have wanted to go into archaeology. That's what really interested him, but then he wouldn't. That was not offered at University of Basel, and he had to live at home to go to school. So he went into medicine and chose psychiatry and studied with Eugene Bloyer at the Colza. This is a picture of that famous hospital where Bloyer was writing about forays of schizophrenia. And he also supported his study, research, and Jung went to Paris to study hypnosis with Pierre Janet, just as Freud had done. So right after he finishes medical school, he gets married on Valentine's Day to Emma Jung. She happens to be one of the richest women in all of Switzerland because she's heir to the Swiss watches, the international watch company. They have 5 children together, and she becomes an analyst herself and publishes 2 books. Here's the family. And here's a picture of Jung as the attending physician at Burkholz Hospital. He's doing research on word association, which is sort of like a polygraph. He would give different words and time people as to how quickly they would respond. And the words that had more of a pause indicated that that might be where complex was. Later, he said he found the dream gave him more information about a person's complexes in more vivid detail than any such test. He went on to explore the wisdom of the dream. But at this time in his career, he was doing that scientific work and also studying schizophrenia, which at that time was called dementia precox. And he had a small private practice and served as a medic in World War II, World War I.
Teresa?
Yes.
Teresa, your audio is breaking up. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that, but I don't want to interrupt your presentation, but we're losing some of the information. But in any case.
Let me see if I'm plugged in.
Okay.
I'll plug in a bit better. Is that better? I hope.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, the plug wasn't all the way in. Okay, so he published some papers and a book and sent them to Freud, who read them, and they started a correspondence. And finally, on March 3rd, 1907, he went to Vienna and met with Freud, and they spoke constantly for 13 hours. They had so much to share. And he went back and visited again, and there's a famous episode about the bookcase moving. And Jung said, "Oh, that's a catalytic exteriorization phenomenon." And you know, they put the bookcase back, and Freud said, "Oh, that's bosh," like he would dismiss this idea. But Jung felt a heat coming in his belly and said, "No, it's going to happen again." And indeed, the bookcase moved again. It's an example of Jung just looking at phenomenon, not dismissing it, but I'm just saying this is what happened. They were both invited to the Clark lectures, and afterwards the International Psychoanalytic Association was started, and Freud was so impressed with Jung at that time that he wanted him to be president for a lifetime. But you know, the association said, no, 2 years is enough. But Freud was praising him and saying, he's my eldest son, my crown prince, my true successor. So they're invited to the Clark lectures, which means a long steamboat ride to America. You see Freud on the left, Stanley Hall, who invited them, and Jung on the right, on the bottom row here. And while they're on their boat, they share dreams. Freud's approach to dreams was that you remember a dream, but it's not the actual dream you had. There's actually a latent dream that you forgot that the dream you had is sort of covering for, and that you need to get to that other side, and that a lot of times there's a wish fulfillment aspect of the dream. Jung took a different view of that in terms of exploring the symbols themselves and the wisdom that it was there apparently and not camouflage. Freud shared a dream, and Jung said to him, well, I need to know more about your personal life in this aspect. And Freud said, I can't tell you that. I cannot risk my authority. And this ruffled Jung. He felt Freud should care more about truth than his authority. But Jung shared a dream that there was, I actually have the dream in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. This is the dream. I was in a house I didn't know, which had 2 stories. It was my house, and I found myself on the upper story where there was a kind of salon furnished with the old pieces in Rococo style. On the wall hung a number of precious old paintings. I wondered that this should be my house, and I thought, well, not bad. But then it occurred to me that I did not know what the lower floor looked like. Descending the stairs, I reached the ground floor. There, everything was much older, and I realized this part of the house must date from the 15th or 16th century. And then he goes to the next room, and it's medieval, and he goes further. He says, now I really must explore the whole house. And he descends another staircase, and it's in Roman times. And then he comes down to the basement, and there's a stone slab in the floor, and he pulls a ring from the floor and goes into this narrow steps down into the depths. And there in this cave are 2 skulls with broken pottery. Now, Freud was chiefly interested in the dreams about these 2 skulls. He returned to them immediately and repeatedly, and wondered, who do you have a death wish for that there'd be 2 skulls? Freud was kind of pushing for a death wish toward him. Jung lied about this, but he really felt this dream had a totally other meaning than a death wish. And so he thought that this had a theme of successive layers of consciousness. It was kind of an image to the psyche, he wrote. That is to say, states of consciousness with hereto unconscious additions. The salon where you meet people would be the consciousness, but as you go farther, deeper down, it's unconsciousness. And it pointed to where there were further reaches of a state of consciousness I have described. These signified past times and past stages of consciousness. And it started, his whole feeling about this was intense interest, fascination. And he wondered if there was something innate beneath our personal psyche, another layer. And his action was, I must explore the whole house. And so he decided to read a book on symbolism and mythology of ancient people. And so again, this is the beginning of looking beyond the personal unconscious to a more collective or transpersonal unconscious. So at the Clark lectures, you see Stanley Hall in the middle and Freud again, and Jung next to him. And he also met, and Stanley Hall was putting Freud and Jung and this fellow in his house for a few days. And I don't know if you recognize him, but it was William James. And Jung felt an affinity to James. They had many walks and long talks. And this happened a year before William James died. He'd already published his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, and had described the similarity in many experiences and religions around the world, that there was always something that was ineffable, that you couldn't even put into words. It was beyond verbal understanding. but there was something noetic that brought new knowledge to the person. It might be very brief, and it was received. It wasn't created. It was something passively received. Jung, I think, picked up on this. And he also liked to use the word numinous for these religious experiences, which he took from Lutheran theologian Rudolf Otto, the idea of the whole. And the numinous had a quality of mysterium, tremendous, and fascinans, which meant it was something mysterious beyond our full knowledge. Tremendum, meaning it was so tremendous it almost made you want to quake in your boots, to tremble, or to have goosebumps, or to quicken your breath, or raise your pulse. It had this feeling physically about it. And it was fascinating. It was so compelling and awe-inspiring. And that quality of numinous could either be belong to the object itself or a presence. But with all of these, there was a peculiar alteration of consciousness. So Jung started writing a controversial book on symbols of transformation, which he knew would be veering off from the Freudian way of looking at things. And this is the dream he had. He's writing it. This dream is in two parts. And when you have a dream that's in two parts, you can also compare and contrast those two sides. Page 163. It was toward evening, and I saw they're on the Swiss-Austrian border. It's toward evening, and he sees an old imperial Austrian customs official who was stooped over and peevish and rather melancholic and vexed. There were other persons present. Someone informed me that the old man was not really there, but was the ghost of a customs official who had died years ago. He is one of those who still couldn't die properly. That was the first part of the dream. Now you see, this is happening right at the border between the Swiss, and Jung is from Switzerland, and Austria, where Freud lived. It's toward evening, meaning the light is waning. And this customs official, the person who wants to do things taxing properly, is melancholic, and he's almost a has-been. So in this dream. And the question was, why couldn't he die properly? Why wasn't there a simple split between this, between his admiration and his dependence on Freud for his career, and the conflict between his own free thinking and criticism he would receive, that Jung would receive. And he had to clarify the situation. The second half of the dream that night was in Basel or Bergamo, Italy. And it happens in the blazing sun of high noon. And all the shops are closed for lunch. But the thing that's particularly odd, and you always look for what's out of place or what's odd about a dream, is that there's a knight. There's a vision of a knight in full armor, full of life, that comes through the town. But no one seems to recognize him. And he wore a helmet of a kind that's called a bassinet with eyeslets and chain armor, and had a white tunic, which was woven front and back with a large red cross. One can easily imagine how I felt suddenly in this modern city during the noonday rush hour, a crusader coming toward me. What struck me as particularly odd was that none of the many persons walking about seemed to notice him. No one turned his head or gazed at him. It was as though he was completely invisible to everyone but me. I asked myself what this apparition meant, and then it was as if someone answered me that there was no one there to speak. Yes, this is the apparition. The night always passes here between 12 and 1 o'clock. So these are contrasting figures between the old customs official and this knight in armor. And his feeling about that was that it was something very numinous and compelling, and with some spiritual feeling that this knight was carrying. And he had to ask himself, what does this knight say or mean, and whom does the girl serve? And he realized he had to seek learning beyond what Freud was offering from these two dreams and publish a book, even though it would herald the end of their relationship. There's many reasons why their relationship severed, and some people say it's because he published a book that was completely in a different direction. He also published a second book about psychological types, which is how people can be of different temperaments and look at the same material differently. And he realized that Freud and Adler had different temperaments, and his psychological types of extroversion versus introversion, intuitive, sensate, feeling versus thinking, became Myers-Briggs personality inventory. And so they just had different temperaments, and which meant basically a different approach that they needed to take. Another theory is about Sabina Spielrein, who had been with Jung as a patient, a student, and as a colleague, and went to Freud. That's in the movie A Dangerous Method. And also that Freud kept looking for symbols of a death wish toward him from Jung's father complex. But the actual letters that they had showed that there was a Freudian slip of the pen that Freud put out to Jung, and Jung said, your techniques of treating your pupils like patients is a blunder. In that way you produce either slavish sons or impudent puppies. And Freud said, demonstrably untrue, and said that, Jung lacks insight into his illness, and proposed that they abandon their relations. And there, they never wrote again. But Jung learned a lot from Freud and continued in the importance of listening to the patient seriously, of looking at dreams as the number one way to get the unconscious, understanding child development and how that gets transferred to adult relationships, and the repetition compulsion. And he still honored the sexual instinct and aggression instinct, but he took things further. There wasn't only the personal unconscious, there was a collective or transpersonal unconscious. Not only an Oedipal complex, but many other complexes. Not everyone, like Oedipus, is in love with their mother. Some people have Medea or Medusa for a mother, and that's a different myth, a different complex, a different archetype in the center of the complex. He looked at psychic energy as being in many forms, not just sexual energy, and that our psyche was not only dealing with past experiences, but what was emerging, what was leading us forward for future aspirations. And then he added religious instinct, that there's something inside of us that seeks meaning, that is looking for wholeness, that has a capacity for reflecting on itself. Freud had published a book called The Future of an Illusion, where he said, religion is a wish for a protected father figure, or wanting to be protected. And Jung disagreed with that. He believed we all shared an inner divinity, or a faculty for relationship with God. He said the religious impulse rests on an instinctive basis and is therefore specifically human function. When any natural human function gets lost, is denied consciousness and intentional expression, a general disturbance results. And so it'd say that you can have neurosis from not developing your religious or blocking or inhibiting this religious impulse. The religious instinct is an attitude peculiar to man, and its manifestation can be followed through human history. He went as far as to say, even if we got rid of all the world religions, that because of how we are with access to this transpersonal unconscious, that we would still develop a religious attitude to something sacred. And he defined religion as that relationship to the sacred, and not creed or dogma. That attitude occurs after numinous experiences. We have a natural tendency for reflection, and that there's an archetype. There's like a blueprint within, like the light within, and that this can be found in many religions around the world from antiquity onward. The archetype of the self can be the Atman in the Upanishads, such as when at the end of yoga class we say namaste, the light me honors the light in you. Or the Buddhists talk about the Buddha nature of each person. And when I was in Thailand, we greeted people with our hands like this and moved the hands toward them to say a lotus for the Buddha in you. In Judaism, the Lord is both transcendent and personal, interacting in our lives. In Christianity, the kingdom of heaven is within us. In Islam, although there's the transcendent is beyond our imaginings, we all have a holy longing to be connected with the transcendent and great mystery. Now, instinct, and that's the religious side of this. The instinct is an involuntary drive that pushes us to certain activities. And Jung identified 5 instincts. Freud had 2, sex and aggression, but Jung said creativity is an instinct. There's this religious or reflective instinct, an instinct to be active, to do something, sexuality and hunger. So his relationship with Freud crashed. He was sort of banned from other psychoanalytic meetings, and he was alone in his home on December 12th, and thinking about all the things he feared. And then he let himself drop. Suddenly, it was as though the ground literally gave way beneath my feet. I plunged into dark depths. And he started to have visions, different images coming to him. And these are what he ended up painting in the Red Book. He was not having a psychosis. He was still a functioning person. He was still seeing his own patients. He still had his marriage and his family life and colleagues. But he would take time to pursue the inner images for what they were teaching him. And my entire life consisted in elaborating what had burst forth from the unconscious and flooded me like an enigmatic stream and threatened to break me. That was the stuff and the material for more than only one life. Everything later was merely the outer classification, scientific elaboration, and the integration into life. But the numinous beginning, which contained everything, was then. In this process of harvesting these images from the collective unconscious, he developed sort of an active imagination so that you not only, write down, transcribe what happened, but you could have a dialogue with these figures or symbols. You can paint them, you can, have movement or dance or other ways to amplify these images, and also to connect them to mythologies or fairy tales or other histories. So this was the first dream he had, and it was a bit disturbing. And he goes into a dark cave, and there's and goes through some icy water where there's a rock glowing, and he lifts up the crystal and discovers a hollow underneath. And first he doesn't see anything, and then he realizes that there's a corpse with a youth with blonde hair and a wound in his head, which you can see here. This is this painting he did of his dream. And by then, a red newborn sun rising up out of the depths of the waters. And there was blood and blood and blood, and it felt nauseous to him. And he was very stunned by this image and realized that it was related to the hero and solar myth in Egypt of the Egyptian scarab, because in the center is the scarab image. And you can amplify your symbol, whatever you have in a dream, by did something happen that day? Did you see a beetle that day? The nature of the symbol itself, it has a hard carapace and how it moves. Personal associations to beetles, but also collective associations. And in Egypt, there was a scarab-faced god named Khepri. This is a picture of Khepri. And the name means coming into being. And because the scarabs would lay their eggs in dung, when they would hatch, they would come out. It seemed like they would just come out of dung. And and then they would eat the dung afterwards. And so this Khepri was the scarab-faced god of the life, death, birth cycle. So you should also remember that they're entering World War I at this time, and you can feel like that's going to be an apocalypse, but there will be rebirth after that. So that's one archetype of the rebirth cycle. There's other archetypes of persona, shadow, anima, and animus, and the self. The persona is a social identity of just how we present ourselves to the world. It comes from the word for masks that we used. And he had a dream in which this god was coming at dawn on a chariot, and he and his friend had to shoot him. This was, he felt great remorse, and it was very disturbing to him that he had done this. But then he realized that this was what was being played out in the world. The Germans want to achieve heroically just to have what is their own way. And that he himself had that sense of where there's a will, there's a way. But he had to kill that attitude in him. It no longer suited him. And what he learned from this dream was my heroic idealism had to be abandoned. There are higher things than the ego's will, and to these one must bow. The shadow are the things we say, I'm not like that. And I've written that essay that's in the announcement about that. But that it's important to look at these images of the darkness. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. But he also has a warning that is what is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. And then the animus figure are from the opposite sex who can be a guide or muse in the transpersonal realm. So it is a bridge. And in the Red Book, Salome is an anima figure, but she is blind because she does not see the meaning of things. She has an undeveloped feeling function that relies on sensation. But we need to get to the self, because the self is the archetype of wholeness and the regulating center of the psyche and a transpersonal power that transcends ego. And this the self is an archetype, like a blueprint within ourselves of a God image, and that can be depicted in a wise personality, such as a prophet or a king or a hero, or in a symbol of wholeness, such as a circle or union of opposites. So in the Red Book, he had Philemon, who had superior insight. And he wasn't just a man, he had these wings, kingfisher wings. And that gave him a sense that he was also the spirit, a spiritual person having this design. And there was a synchronicity that in Switzerland, he came across a dead kingfisher bird in his garden right after he had this dream of Philemon. And he said that these figures in his visions brought home the crucial insight that there are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own light. Here is the symbol of the self as a circle with a vertical line, which is toward the transcendent, and a horizontal line for the earth. So it's a connection of heaven and earth. And you can see on the bottom is what's happening in Switzerland. It's the Industrial Revolution. On the left side is the rural areas, and on the right side you see the factories. But this person meditating has a vessel above his head, and it's containing this incredible energy from the transcendent, which holds still with whatever is happening. So from that, he started drawing mandalas every way, and that gave him a feeling of what is in the center. It also contains the circle that contains it. And this is a very famous dream of the archetype of the self. The dream is set in Liverpool. And so the people of Liverpool, England, are so pleased with this dream that they actually have a monument there. You can see monuments to the Beatles, and you can see this bust of Carl Jung. Because he says, the dream was in Switzerland, and the streets are dark and rainy and foggy. And he climbs some steps to go to the city square on a hill. And there is a sunlit island in the center of a pool. And in the center of that pool is this luminous magnolia tree. And the people around him are talking that someone from Switzerland had settled here. And he thinks to himself in the dream, I know very well why he has settled there. Then I awoke. I wonder, how would you draw such a dream? We have Jung's drawing. And he calls his drawing window opening onto eternity. He said Liverpool, because the liver is an essential organ, it's the pool of life. And everything is leading toward this center, the energy and the numinosity of this red magnolia blossom. And the question is, why had Swiss men settled here? And he said, he writes, I had had a vision of unearthly beauty, and that is why I was able to live at all. And he stopped doing mandalas and decided he needed to learn how to approach the center. A year later, he decided to draw a second mandala of the dream, but it came out this way. And he asked himself, why does this look so Chinese? And when he painted that in this golden, well-fortified castle, his friend Richard Wilhelm, who had been in China, sent him a copy of his translation of The Secret of the Golden Flower, which was a Chinese meditation manual to get to the golden flower inside oneself, which is similar to the red magnolia blossom. and realized that this was a similar process also in alchemy of turning the gold to the lead to gold, that these around the world was an individuation process, and this is your way to wholeness. And what she discovered was in many different cultures. And Erich Neumann described this individuation process as making, Jung applied Erich Neumann's idea of the ego-self axis as making a connection in the individuation process to the archetype of the self. He also traveled throughout the world to get more ideas of all of these things. I'm just aware of time. I want to get to, he had a near-death experience. He didn't call it a near-death experience. He had visions of it, but it met all the criteria for a near-death experience that we've described in modern times. And he started studying alchemy, which showed him how these symbols can be a real transformation in the psyche. So I've thought about this. I'm sure there can be many other ways that transcendence, an experience of the transcendent gives us an opportunity for transformation. It takes us beyond the rational, beyond addictions, beyond despair, beyond neurotic blocks, beyond our own self-absorbed egos, and beyond death. An example of beyond being rational, he had a patient who was very stuck in rational thinking obsessively. She had a dream, someone gave her a gold scarab necklace, and she gave it short shrift and went on and droned on, and he didn't seem to be able to get through to her that there might be something more than this dry thinking. And he heard a scratching on the window and opened it up, and in flew a golden scarab, just like she had had in her dream. And he handed it to her and said, "Here is your golden scarab." And it took something like synchronicity to get her beyond the confines of mere rationalism, to realize that there is a psyche at work in other ways, and open up to that. And the scarab, being a symbol of rebirth, is almost having her rebirth into this, into spirituality. Beyond addictions, he said every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic, alcohol, or morphine, or idealism. Bill W. wrote to him in 1961 to express appreciation for how he had contributed to the spiritual aspect of recovery after he had seen a patient for a while. He had a relapse, and he said, "I can't help you with that. You need to get a group of people. You need to, develop a spiritual, a living spirituality with something stronger than you, and also to continue to do the shadow work, which is a personal inventory." So when he wrote to Bill W., he used the word spiritus contra spiritum, that the spirits of alcohol are trumped by the spiritual, because he compared the craving as to actual craving for thirst for the divine. And if you could take that to a higher level, that would be answered. So somewhat like Einstein said, a problem can't be solved in the level of consciousness that created it. This is what Jung said. That might be controversial, but it's the 12 Steps program have helped many people and have a good prevention of relapse. And he said the decisive question for man, is he related to something infinite or not? If we understand and feel that here in this life we already have a link with the infinite, our desires and our attitudes change. Beyond despair, we saw how that picture that he drew of window into eternity, this feeling of unearthly beauty actually gave him a reason to live when he was in crisis. And beyond neurosis, he writes that most of his patients after midlife, most of their issues were related to a spiritual problem. And the thing that cures a neurosis must be as convincing as the neurosis, whether someone is stuck in obsessiveness or has a conversion neurosis or hysteria, that has a certain draw to it, and that a numinous experience would be more compelling than the neurosis. And beyond ego, which we saw in this stream, that there are higher things than the ego's will, and to these one must bow. And beyond death, we talked about his near-death experiences. There's a wonderful movie about a series of dreams that a terminally ill man had, and messages that people had from the afterlife that shows life goes on. So this is how the transcendent helps for transformation in the psyche, and I'm sure we can maybe discuss many other ways that that works as well. So Jung said the first half of life was to have a mature adjustment to adult life, you know, career, society, marriage, children, community service. But at midlife, you have to reclaim your soul, and the ego aligns to the self. And in late life, there's a letting go. As the soul, as your body diminishes, that the soul strengthens. On his tombstone, this is his family's tombstone with his parents, his sister Gertrude, his wife Emma. This is what he chose to write above, called or not called, and on below, God is present. And then from 1 Corinthians 15:47, on the left side, first man is from the earth and earthly, and the second man is from heaven and heavenly. And that is really what his work was to make that spiritual connection in the second half of life. So summary is, we already have a link with the infinite. We have this religious instinct, a capacity for numinous experiences. We get this blueprint for an innate connection to the divine, which can be developed, and have continual revelations and symbols from the transpersonal unconscious, which can contribute to personal transformation. And I'll end with this quote from Marie-Louise Lanfranz, which says it better than I can. Experience of self is a feeling of standing on solid ground inside oneself on a patch of eternity, which even physical death cannot touch.
Wonderful, Teresa. That's phenomenal. This is amazing. Is this your last slide?
That's my last slide. I'll close it then.
Well, if there's anybody who'd like to ask a question, go ahead and ask it. So I know we've had the problems with the video, and so if you want a clarification, Teresa will certainly be here for another, what do you think, Teresa? Another 5-10 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Like Linda White has a question. Unmute yourself, please.
Beautiful presentation, but you went way too fast. Could you just go over the transformation part? I got synchronicity, pray to a higher power, and what were the rest of them?
Okay, I'll put that up again.
Okay.
Share. Yeah, I realized I had more than the time to bear. Okay, so that we move beyond the rational and open up to rational things that can happen. Praying to the higher power, beyond despair, there's a vision of eternity, and that the numinous can be more compelling than the neurosis. And the ego is surrendered or put in alignment. There's something very humbling that comes with a numinous experience, and the right alignment for the ego, and that the transcendence moves us beyond death as well. But I'm sure there's others. Those were the ones I thought of. Maybe there's something you'd like to add to that list.
Yeah, Teresa, I wanted to ask, is your presentation from one book or from a collection of sources?
Oh, it's from a collection of sources. All of the dreams were from Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. That's why it says MDR. Some of the sources were his Cherry lectures at Yale, a collection of essays called Modern Man in Search of a Soul.
Okay.
And the pictures are from the Red Book.
Okay. Would you make your sources available to us?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you.
I also have a question, and thank you so much for the presentation. In your reading of Jung, have you come across what kind of rituals he would engage in for his spiritual experiences? I mean, other than the dreams, like prayers, what kind of prayers or meditations or?
Yeah, I don't have any particular prayers. There was meditation. He did a lot of stonework. He found that carving in stone was very meaningful to him. And he built a house on the lake called Bollingen. And it was all very symbolic. There was a tower when his mother died and a tower when his wife died. And he painted murals of Philemon. So taking whatever images you get, symbols from the unconscious, and putting them out there and interacting with them, whether it's in stonework, artwork,
So I guess what I'm asking is, how did he come in touch with the unconscious? What was his best method? The dreams?
Yes, he would say the dreams. There's two ways. The unconscious dreams, Freud would say, is the royal road to the unconscious. He also said the complex. We didn't have time to talk about that more pathology, but when you have a strong emotional reaction to something, that's giving you information as well. And inside the complex, you would look for what archetype or myth is being played out. So it would give you an opening for reflection. He did a lot of self-reflection, a lot of journaling.
Ellen Boone had a question. Ellen, do you want to ask it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I was wondering what Jung would think about the current medical research in which people are given drugs and have mind-expanding experiences, like feeling one with the universe. Would he frown upon that, or would he think the inner self is being released that way?
Yeah, there are people that go to have an experience of the cosmos from ayahuasca in South America, or there's even studies whether LSD can be helping with PTSD. So it does give people access to imagery, and you have to work with the imagery. I don't think he would promote that, that you can come across your images, dreams, or even artwork that's compelling to you, so you don't have to do it drug-induced.
Wonderful presentation. Are you able to go back to the slide about the individuation process? It was very quick. And I wasn't able.
Yeah, I realized I had much more material. When I added reading the dreams, I realized I had too much material. So the individuation process. Stages of life. Okay. Is this the one you wanted with his quotes? This is one quote from him. Now, becoming an individuation process, he distinguishes from individualism. You know, it's not it's not developing more ego strength, because the ego becomes in a right relationship with the capital S self. That's much more than ego, and so it's humbled and receptive, and it's not only about oneself but all other selves. So it's been said we individuate into one another, that all aspects, as you start owning more and more of your shadow or self-understanding, you become at one with all of humanity. That it doesn't shut you out from the world, but gathers the world to oneself. There's another analyst who said the time comes when we individuate into one another, that it becomes not just self-knowledge, but all of humanity. And beyond that, the ego can self-dissolve and self-transcend into just pure being in samadhi or some of the other self-transcendence.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Okay, Bev is up next. Bev, go ahead and ask your question.
You mentioned the Myers-Briggs type in one of your slides. Did he have
Yes.
any direct relationship with those developers?
Oh, that I don't know. I'd have to look up when it was developed, because he died in 1961. And I thought that came later. I'm not sure. Good question.
Thank you.
And then Melissa Mills has a question.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. I'm so glad that I could be here. I wondered, do you know if Jung knew anything about Yogananda and his translation of Bhagavad Gita? Because a lot of what you're saying sounds so much, particularly when the self, thinking of the self, and just that self with a capital S, which is in a way what we're looking for.
Yeah, the self with a capital S is similar to the Atman in the Upanishads. I don't know if you knew Yogananda. Williams James, who he talked with, was in close connection with a Hindu teacher at Harvard. And he did write a book on yoga and Kundalini. So he traveled in India, I mean, when it wasn't easy to travel in India, and meet with different people there. So he wrote about the religions of the East.
Very good. Okay, Shalad?
Oh, thanks. I think I'm actually following up on the same thing. I'm reading on a lot of kind of Advaita and the non-dualistic philosophy of consciousness studies and all that. And I heard that Carl Jung was in India and he saw Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi was one that went to the hills of Arunachalam and was a self-made Maharshi in that sense. He was supposed to be the silent one, didn't talk much. A lot of his teaching was through silence. But do you know anything about that visit of Jung with Maharshi, Ramana
Yeah,
Maharshi?
let's see. It's in the there's a chapter in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections called Travels. And there's also a book called Jung in India. And let's see if and there's also his Kundalini lectures that have been translated. Let's see. I'm not sure I can find it right away. Oh, India. He was in India in 1938, and he'd been searching talks with Subramania Iyer, guru of Maharaja Mysore, whose guest he was for some time.
Thank you.
Yeah, so so he studied some of the meditation that was there.
Okay, well, we're at 5 minutes after. So Teresa, thank you so much for a phenomenal presentation. And, we just so appreciate your time and your knowledge, what extensive knowledge you have about this topic. So thank you once again. And thank everybody too for participating and asking questions. And we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.